Good afternoon. My name is Amanda Rivera. I'm the hearing examiner presiding over today's hearing. The date is March 30th, 2023, and this is case SEZ2022-00014 and variance VAR 2022-00013. Because this is a quasi-judicial hearing, all evidence and testimony must be taken under oath, so if you intend to speak, if you could please raise your hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you will provide is the truth?
I do.
I do.
Thank you. Since we don't have any members of the public here, I'll dispense with those instructions and we can begin with the applicant. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Veronica Martin with TDM Consulting. I'm representing the applicant, Ms. Yawanka Colas. I have been accepted as an expert witness in the past. I would like to be accepted again as such today.
Yes, thank you.
Before I get started, I would like to enter one exhibit into the record, and it's a copy of today's PowerPoint presentation.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So that will be applicant's exhibit 1. And I did receive a copy of the 48-hour letter stating there were no issues, so that's applicant's exhibit A.
It's the intent of the property owner, Ms. Colas, to convert the existing single-family home into a daycare facility. Ms. Colas acquired the vacant lot at 5020 Lee Circle South to provide a parking lot with drop-off area. The Land Development Code requires a special exception to permit a daycare facility in the RS1 zoning district per Land Development Code Section 34-694. In addition, due to existing site conditions, the applicant is also requesting a variance from Land Development Code Section 33-1405C3, landscape buffers. The code requires commercial uses that abut single or multi-family residential uses to provide a 25-foot wide buffer with 7 trees, a double staggered hedgerow, and 33 ground covers per 100 linear feet. The variance request is to permit a 10-foot wide buffer on the east side of the existing structure, a 12-foot wide buffer on the west side of the existing structure, and 15-foot wide buffers for the remainder of the property. As I said, the subject property does consist of 2 lots, 5021 Lee Boulevard and 5020 Lee Circle South. The property is approximately 1 mile on the west side of Gunnery Road. The property has a future land use classification as central urban. It is zoned RS1 and is located in the Lehigh Acres planning community. A little background about this property. The northeastern lot that's developed was approved as a model home per resolution ZB-84-087, but it was not developed until 2002 and as a single family home. The southern lot has remained vacant. Surrounding uses are vacant and single-family homes, and they also have a RS1 zoning district and central urban future land use category. I will mention that this section of Lee Boulevard does have a couple commercial uses. The Family Dollar and O'Reilly Auto Parts is located about 325 feet east of this property. The special exception site plan shows the property at build-out. Lee Boulevard, a county-maintained arterial roadway, is located along the north property line, and Lee Circle South, a county-maintained local road, is located along the south property line. Redevelopment of the property to a daycare facility includes removing the existing driveway on Lee Boulevard, so all traffic must access the site from Lee Circle South. When I presented this property in this proposed special exception and variance to the Lehigh Acres planning community, their only concern with the redevelopment was the safety of having a driveway directly on Lee Boulevard. It seems there are several other daycare centers that have a similar situation, and there was cause for safety concerns of parents, of vehicle stacking when parents are dropping or picking off their children. So the applicant did agree to close that driveway and only provide a single access from Lee Boulevard South.
Do you have a copy of the minutes of that meeting? I didn't see them in the staff report.
Oh, I provided them.
Okay, so we can get a copy of that.
Yes.
And then with regard to that, then is the intention that the properties are going to become strapped together so that you're not landlocking
Yes, ma'am.
the Lee piece? Okay. Is that a condition of this approval, or is that something that's already been done?
It has not been done yet. It is not a condition of this approval, but it can be added to the conditions. In addition to the new parking lot and driveway, other improvements include a fenced-in playground area, pedestrian facilities, and buffers. Land Development Code Section 33-1405C3 requires commercial uses abutting single-family uses to provide a 25-foot buffer. In this case, due to existing site conditions, the applicant is requesting the variance to provide a 10-foot wide buffer on the east of the existing structure, a 12-foot wide buffer to the west, and a 15-foot wide buffer for the remainder. I do want to mention that we're not requesting any reduction in the required vegetation. At this point, I'm going to turn over to Dean to address traffic, drainage, and utilities, and I'm going to come back and address LEED plan and the criteria of approval.
Is that, just to go back for the
Sure.
buffer for a second, so if I'm understanding, the 15 feet would extend all the way along the parking areas and then as far
Yes.
around the playground as possible. It's just where the single-family home encroaches into that area on either side.
So, yes.
It'll
So
jog
it's
a little bit,
12.47 here, and then it's going to be 15 feet along both sides.
but the same number of plantings.
Just
Just
a number of plantings, right?
okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm Dean Martin with TDM Consulting. I've previously been accepted as an expert in civil site engineering and would like to be accepted again.
Yes, thank you.
I'm going to briefly discuss traffic, drainage, and utilities. As shown on the site plan, we are, as Veronica stated, we are taking out the right-in, right-out driveway on Lee Boulevard in lieu of a full access driveway on Lee Circle South. So we use the 11th edition of the ITE trip generation manual to estimate the trip generations for a daycare, land use code 565. We use the square footage of the existing structure off of the LIPA website for our independent variable. As seen on this slide, the traffic generated is 17 in the AM peak and 17 in the PM peak. With 9 entering on the AM and 9 exiting on the PM is the peak turning movements, which is not close to generating enough traffic to meet thresholds for turn lanes on Lee Boulevard, on Lee Road South, Lee Circle South. We also analyzed the project's impacts to the surrounding roadway network. The nearest arterial street is Lee Boulevard. Per the 2021 concurrency report, it has a B level of service near the project with a 2020 peak direction of flow of 2,037 vehicles per hour and a performance standard capacity of 2,840 vehicles per hour. We're only adding 7 peak hour peak direction trips, which is obviously a very negligible impact based on the concurrency report. This project is in Lehigh. Lamsted is the controlling entity for stormwater in Lehigh. And water quality, right now there's not any discernible water management facilities on either parcel, but we will be providing those with the redevelopment during the DO process. We're going to provide water quality in dry detention swales along the parking lot and potentially some up in here if we can make the grades work. We're still working through the DO process. So it's going to be mostly between the parking and the property line. I know there's going to be some buffers there, but we still have room for a swale on both sides. So once water quality is achieved, we're not sure we can get any pipes in this direction to go into Lee Boulevard, so we're going to probably have to go into Lee Circle with our discharge in this case. All on-site water management infrastructure, including the swales and the control structure, will be owned and maintained by the applicant. And per the recent survey, the property is in an X flood zone. And utilities briefly, the building itself currently is serviced by a potable water lateral along with using a 12-inch water main along Lee Boulevard in this area. And it's also serviced by an on-site septic system, which is northeast of the building in the front yard. The provider for both potable water and sanitary sewer in this area is FGUA. Per FGUA, the nearest public sanitary sewer is an 8-inch force main on the other side of Lee Boulevard, which would require a directional drill under Lee Boulevard and a private pump station. As I said before, we are going through the DO process. We haven't submitted yet. If we meet the threshold in the LDC and the Lee plan, we will abandon the septic system and connect to public sewer.
The commercial uses that were mentioned that are just to the east, those aren't receiving sewer lines?
There is actually further to the east, I didn't bring that with me, but by memory, further to the east, there is another force main on our side of the road, but it's about like 500 feet to the east. So I believe that's where they're tied into.
Okay.
But in our area, there's not one on our side. It's across the street on the north side of Lee Boulevard.
So there is sewer connectivity available, but whether or not you actually have to tie into it will be determined at the time of development order?
That is correct. I don't believe we meet the threshold because we have limited flow. But if we do meet the threshold, obviously we'll tie in. Because the septic system is actually working fine. I mean, it was designed for a single-family home for 400 gallons a day, and I don't think we're going to meet that flow requirement.
That was one of my, there's 5 employees. I don't know how many kids are anticipated to be.
I think there was 30 is what we were told. So when you add that up, it's 375 gallons a day, and the septic system was designed for 400. So, I mean, it's already sized for that. If they added kids or added employees, maybe we would have to analyze the septic system. But at this point, we feel the flow is going to be fit within the septic system. That was all I had for you. If you had any questions, I'll be here to answer.
Does staff have any questions? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. Always do that.
I'm going to go over the lead plan criteria, then the special exception and variance request and criteria and conditions. The request is consistent with the goals, objectives, and policies of the lead plan. The central urban future land use category is described as the urban core of the county with the highest levels of urban services. So this is consistent with lead plan policy 1.1.3. Objectives 2.1 and 2.2 intend to direct new growth to future urban areas in compact and contiguous growth patterns where adequate public facilities exist. Redevelopment of the single-family home in the urban core continues the growth patterns in this area. Policy 5.1.5 intends to protect the existing and future residential areas from any encroachment of uses that are potentially destructive to the character and integrity of the residential development. Properties along Lee Boulevard do contain a mix of residential and commercial uses. The existing uses abutting the subject property are residential, and although the applicant is seeking a variance in the width of the buffers, the required vegetation will still be provided. The hedgerow is required to be planted at 48 inches high and maintained at 72 inches high on both sides of the existing structure and parking lot. In addition, a 6-foot-high solid fence or wall is required around the playground area. The abutting residential properties are adequately buffered and shielded from the proposed daycare use. Lead Plan Policies 6.1.1, 6.1.4, and 6.1.7 set forth requirements for commercial developments, including compatibility. A traffic impact statement, letter of availability for water and sewer, and site plan were provided for staff review. The special exception and variance applications provided the information regarding setbacks, buffers, parking, traffic, and pedestrian access. In addition, we did have conversations with Lee Tran, and the applicant will be required to provide a Lee Tran bus stop at time of development order approval. In addition, the daycare facilities are required to go through extensive permitting as required by Florida statutes and DCF, and that will determine the number of children available that the daycare can provide service to. This requests are consistent with policies 6.1.1, 6.1.4, and 6.1.7. Goal 25 describes the Lehigh Acres community as an area that is utilizing development and redevelopment to overcome the history of platted single-family residential uses to create a vibrant residential and commercial community. The Lehigh Acres Planning Committee was supportive of the proposed use, citing the need for more daycare facilities as their population continues to grow. Permitting the proposed daycare facility is in an area that is a mix of residential commercial uses is consistent with Goal 25. Land Development Code Section 34-145C3A establishes the decision-making criteria for special exception requests. As demonstrated, the request is consistent with the goals, policies, objectives, and intent of the LEAD plan. It will protect, conserve, or preserve environmentally critical and sensitive areas and natural resources where applicable, is compatible with existing and planned uses in the area, will not be injurious to the neighborhood or detrimental to the public welfare, and is in compliance with zoning regulations pertaining to the use and other applicable regulations. I wanted to touch on the variance hardship. The subject property does consist of lots platted in 1960. They're only 80 feet wide. This single-family home was built in 2002 with a side setback to the west of 12.47 feet and 10.67 feet to the east. Redevelopment of the property requires 25-foot wide landscape buffers to the east and west. Due to the existing site conditions, it's only possible to provide a 12-foot wide buffer to the west and a 10-foot wide buffer to the east where the existing structure is located, with the remaining buffer to be 15 feet wide. The applicant, again, is not requesting a reduction in the buffer vegetation and will provide the 7 trees, double staggered hedgerow, and 33 ground covers per 100 linear feet. And in addition, the hedgerows will be planted at 48 inches high and maintained at 72. Land Development Code Section 34-145 does establish the decision-making criteria for variance requests. I believe we have proven that the property does have inherent exceptional conditions that cause the application of the regulation to create a hardship as defined by Section 34-2 on the property owner. The exceptional conditions are not the result of actions of the property owner taken subsequent to the adoption of the ordinance. The variance granted is the minimum that will relieve the unreasonable burden caused by the application of the regulation to the property, and the granting of the variance will not be injurious to the neighborhood or detrimental to the public welfare, and the variance request is consistent with the LEAD plan. There are several conditions of approval, which the applicant is in agreement with. The first one is that the property must be developed in substantial compliance with the site plan entitled 5021 Lee Boulevard, last revised on 12/2022. The area designated as fenced-in playground on the site plan must be fenced in by a 6-foot wall, and all buffers must meet the minimum required plantings per Section 33-1405 C3, except on the eastern side of the existing structure, which will require a planting area of 4 feet with a single hedgerow at that location, installed at 48 inches at time of planting and maintained at 72 inches. And I believe we did agree to add that the properties must be strapped together to prevent any landlocked parcels. That does conclude my presentation. I can answer any questions.
No questions, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon.
Just to begin with, I don't recall if the applicant made note of it, but the condition, the last condition in the staff report says chapter 34 and it intended to say 33. So just making sure that that's on the record. They brought it up prior to the hearing.
Okay.
But just to begin with, Dirk Danley, Lee County Zoning. I'm a principal planner here in community development. I've been accepted as an expert witness previously in the Lee Plan Land Development Code. I'd like to do so again today.
Yes, thank you.
And the applicant's gone through pretty extensively on this request, so I'll try not to belabor points that they've already gone through, but this is a special exception for a daycare facility in the RS1 zoning district. They are seeking relief from the landscaping requirements to reduce those required buffers, particularly at choke points in the existing principal structure, which was a single family home. The property does consist of 2 different lots. The northeastern property was part of another 2 properties that were approved for model home. That second property was never constructed as a model home and eventually became a single family home in its own right back in 2002. The applicant did provide a site plan. It shows a handful of different things that came up in their presentation. The first was the fact that the intent is to get rid of the access point on Lee Boulevard when this is constructed and only use access onto Lee Circle South. It shows also the buffer areas, the choke points here, which we'll get in a little bit more detail further on. The parking area, and part of the reason why it needs the variance is to fit the number of spaces that they're looking to provide. And then the play area as well, which the applicant already brought up the fact that staff is recommending that area be fully screened by an opaque wall. The special exception criteria in the Land Development Code are listed here, and the applicant's gone through pretty great detail. But just to hit some high levels, and we'll talk about the Lee plan in a moment, but these are platted lots in Lehigh. There's not significant historical or environmentally sensitive areas on these lots. Staff really does see that this is a compatible use. The Lee Boulevard corridor is a mosaic of commercial and residential uses. This continues that. And just to further expand on that, there are areas that are contemplated for commercial nodes in Lehigh, but that doesn't necessarily mean that areas that are not in those commercial nodes are not allowed to have commercial uses. And we really do see this mix of residential and commercial all throughout Lee Boulevard. Staff finds that as conditioned, we really do see that this is a compatible use for the neighborhood. And as the proposed site plan indicates, that there will be compliance with all zoning regulations other than what they've sought relief for. This is an essential urban future land use category. This really has this relatively broad reach for commercial and residential uses. So what they're proposing, although not an intense commercial use, still fits within the intent of that future land use category. There is sufficient infrastructure, as the applicants already presented in this hearing, that there is water and sewer if they meet those thresholds. And the reason why we kind of left it open is staff and the applicant right now are both in agreement. We don't think that they're going to meet a threshold to connect, but because this is really an entitlement and not getting to the point of the development order, those standards may change, something may change, and we want to make sure that there's the flexibility to require that in the future. And then They will have sufficient access. There's sidewalks already on Lee Boulevard. They've already talked about the transit, and then a robust roadway network in Lehigh as well. I want to jump ahead a couple slides and then come back to this one, but just to speak briefly on policy 5.1.5, we really do find this to be a compatible use. The variance relief that they're seeking, when we go into that a little bit in further detail, we'll have to come back to this compatibility review, but I guess we'll discuss that further along when we get to the actual variance review. So there are the two choke points here at 12.47 feet on the west, and then at 10.67 feet on the east. And the way that the conditions are crafted right now for that variance relief is there's a 15-foot required buffer if approved. There's a 15-foot required buffer with all the required plantings that the Land Development Code lays out in Chapter 33. On the west side, where there is 12.47 feet, they're able to provide that in half of the plantings, or in half of the planting area. Sorry, let me restate that. A required buffer can use half of the width for required planting. That is an issue on the east side, where it's only 10.67 feet, because there's a 6-foot buffer or 6-foot easement on all property lines in Lehigh, so they cannot provide half of the buffer width for planting area. So they're really limited to a 4-foot planting area. So they're able to provide the code required planting on the west side with that reduced buffer width. But here, staff proposed just the hedgerow within that 4-foot planting area. And that was the absolute most we felt was going to be a viable solution for what they were required to provide. And then as we continue along the property, this is the required parking for what they're proposing based on the number of staff or employees. To get the circulation to be safe and to be able to provide the sufficient number of parking, they really ran out of space to be able to provide that 25-foot buffer on both sides. And staff really just find that, there is a hardship based on just the dimensions of the site with the existing single-family home working around that. And then additionally, the fact that there's just not a lot of width on the lot. So to go back to the criteria, staff does find that there are inherent exceptional conditions that cause the application of regulation to create a hardship, and that the conditions that are applicable to the property are not from the property owner's actions, and that this is a minimum variance, and that as conditioned that we are not being injurious to the neighborhood or the surrounding public, and that it is consistent with the Lee plan. Just to go back to that 5.1.5, just to put it on the record, even with the 4-foot planting area here, staff does find this is still protecting against commercial uses being adjacent to residential, because this currently is vacant, but there could be a single-family home built there at any point. And with that, staff is here with any questions you may have. I did get a copy of the public information meeting minutes. I can provide those on the record as well.
Yes, thank you. And I don't think I said the staff report was staff exhibit 1, the presentation is staff exhibit 2, and then the minutes will be staff exhibit 3. And I did not have any questions. Did the applicant have any questions? Okay, thank you. Were there any final comments that you wanted to place on the record?
No.
Thank you. It's fairly straightforward, so I appreciate it. And it was a very thorough staff report and an excellent presentation, so thank you. You answered all the questions that I had. So with that, we will conclude the hearing for today. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay safe.